So excited. I have Steve Jennings on podcast today, YouTube, Spotify, and this conversation, not only is it going to be incredibly educational, but give you a deep dive into the background of creatine, this new ingredient. But Steve, you have been a true pioneer in the world of sports supplements since the early 1990s. You introduced creatine to athletes and you have turned it into one of the most popular supplements worldwide. Your journey began at the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, where you worked with some of these top athletes to boost their performance. And it played a major role in innovation. And even now, the trend is coming back around where people are like, creatine. When I heard of creatine back in like 2004, my trainer at the time was like, don't take it. It's going to make you huge. And it was like a steroid. Where nowadays, right, we're understanding how the ATP and the body and the brain and how this all works together. And it's incredible. I ran into you at San Diego Sports and Nutraceutical Summit in San Diego. And we had an incredible conversation. It was flow. And you were sharing with me and I just said, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, we've got a podcast about this because never heard of you. Where have you been? And tell us the exciting stuff that's happening with creatine, because it literally can help people in so many ways. So your first question is, who are you and what do you do?
Oh, Bonnie, thanks for that lovely introduction. It's and I think you'll understand a little bit more about me as this story unfolds. So here we go. So in 1991, I'd already founded a sport nutrition brand in Europe called Maxim, Maxim, and that product was doing really well. Within pretty much from launch, it was successful. We had the support of the British Cycling Federation. Within 6 months, we were adopted by the British Olympic Association as their official energy fuel for Barcelona 1992. For a fledgling company, it basically was a huge validation of the products that we had and the sport nutrition business that we were building, that was just steeped in science. But it was not creatine at this point. The creatine encounter, and it was an encounter, and it is like a series of scenes from a movie, is something that even now, when I think about it, and it wasn't until September of this year that I actually wrote down the story, it's so unbelievable that being the person that was in the center of it, I can hardly believe what happened. It's
okay,
that
so
incredible.
That aha moment that you realized it could be a game changer. Are you saying it was when, like, just before the Olympics?
No. I received a telephone call in March 1992. This telephone call changed the trajectory of sport nutrition, and it changed the trajectory of my life. I received a telephone call at my office, and it was from a doctor called Dr. Roger Harris. And Dr. Roger Harris, together with Eric Hultman and Karin Zonderland in Sweden, they had basically completed the pioneering research that proved that supplementing with creatine monohydrate had the potential to improve athletic performance in sprint and power events by anything from 1% to 3%. They had this categorical evidence with humans. They called me up, or Roger called me up, because he knew that my sport nutrition brand had already been approved by the British Olympic Association to be the energy fuel for the athletes at Barcelona 92. They knew I potentially could get their science into the hands of athletes, which is what they needed. And it was a few years later when I kind of had an ongoing conversation with Roger over the years, and he said, Steve, this was all happening pre-internet. This pioneering research pre-internet could have just got lost for decades. How do you get a piece of research out and into the public consciousness? How do you do that? They're scientists, they publish papers, they go in a database, and other academics find them. And this research was so extraordinary that Roger in particular knew that he needed somebody or something to get this story and this creatine research into the hands of athletes. And that's what he called me up and asked me to do. He gave me a mission.
Well, was it because it was so new and because the research, they don't know how it's going to react, and I'm guessing at that time, because we didn't understand the research in the body, that's where all the mystical, like down low is, right?
Yeah. So what really happened, what had happened was they got the proof in the lab. The proof was very compelling. They needed to start working with some athletes and do muscle biopsies and continue it more in a more real world scenario. And creatine at this point didn't exist as a supplement. It was not a supplement. There was no
How did
creatine
they
for
know about
sale.
what creatine even was?
Well, they're scientists. Creatine has been known about for about 100 years.
Okay.
But the knowledge around creatine in terms of what it can do when it comes to human performance, that kind of breakthrough was in the 80s when it became really quite apparent to this small team of scientists in Sweden, including Roger Harris, who were just hacking away basically in a lab, that there could be some human performance implications here or benefits.
Interesting.
So they went on that trajectory as scientists to find out what was possible. They were running experiments, some worked, some didn't. They were doing biopsies on themselves. They were doing biopsies on a small number of subjects that signed up to be part of their experiments. But this was all very much university campus, behind closed doors, in small rooms, no budget, no funding. They were truly like research scientists. They thought they could be onto something, and they just kept going with what they did, which led to this breakthrough paper, which had a need for them to have access to athletes. I was that person, and after the telephone call, I met with Harrison Holtman, Dr. Roger Harrison, Professor Eric Holtman in the north of England, and this was an incredible meeting. This was in early April 1992. I met with them for the first time. I didn't know what they looked like. There was no internet. I didn't even have a photograph of them. You couldn't go on the internet and search them. It didn't exist the way that it does today. So, I asked them, how am I going to know who you are? And they had flowers in their buttonholes. This is real scene from a movie stuff. And we sat in this hotel in the north of England, like a country house. And they literally just produced this white bag of powder and put it on the table. And at this point, there was only one place in the world that was synthesizing creatine 1 kilo at a time. A kilo at a time. Now we're doing hundreds of tons at a time.
No kidding.
Yeah, they gave me this bag of powder and they said, guard that with your life. That's all we have. We're going to explain to you exactly what you need to do, how the athletes need to use it. So they had a protocol worked out, which was creatine loading, creatine maintenance. They'd gone this far with their thinking. Very, very, very smart people. For me, it's when you look back years later that you realize that you've been in the presence of people that should really have Nobel Prizes for research or science. Absolute unbelievable thinkers and academics, but great storytellers as well. So I got this bag of white powder. They gave me a mission. We need you to get this into the hands of some athletes. I didn't really overthink what I not accepted. I accepted the powder. I accepted the mission. I drove back to where I was living with a bag of white powder on the passenger seat. Imagine doing this. Imagine doing this today and getting stopped on the highway outside of LA.
No kidding. They're gonna go really question you. But before you go any farther, I'm just in my mind. I'm like, okay, when you're discovering a new molecule or something that's in your body, are they cutting them open and they're doing blood tests and they're like, oh, there's this molecule that does this and this and this. Let's name it this. Like, how does it even? Like, how does that even happen?
Well, creatine exists in the body. We have creatine. We produce small amounts naturally. You find creatine in the diet, in meat and fish, but in small quantities.
Very small,
So
yeah.
creatine exists. We all have creatine in us. Creatine is the key energy source inside of the mitochondria. It's what converts our nutrients into utilizable cellular energy. That's why the importance of creatine is, I believe creatine is the foundational layer of anybody's supplement stack. If you can optimize the production of cellular energy, and you can optimize the production of cellular energy for the entire lifespan of somebody, it's going to have huge impacts on their health span, on the way that they age. Because the more you can delay the more you can optimize the production of cellular energy at all life stages, the more energy you have, the better you feel. You cross the blood-brain barrier with new research, specific amounts of creatine. You're getting, the brain cells are full of mitochondria. When you start thinking about this, it's actually not rocket science. It's like, okay, the mitochondria are these powerhouse generators of energy. They depend on the conversion of ATP, ADP. The key energy source is creatine monohydrate or creatine. It's like, it's so obvious, but sometimes something that is so pivotal in our health from a supplement perspective, because it's so obvious, can it be so good? We're always looking for the shiny new thing. We're also always searching for, there must be something else. It must be
can't be true
molecule.
that what you have is right in front of you.
It's right in front of us.
Yeah.
And so the research existed. Roger Harris and Holtman, Professor Holtman had the research. We got it into the hands of the athletes. The athletes started using it at training camp in the journey to the Barcelona Olympics. We were getting feedback from the coaches. It was astonishing what they were telling us in terms of improved recovery, significantly increased work rate so they could take on more work, training workload increased, recovery was compressed, so they were recovering faster, increases in strength, increases in power, increases in speed. And yeah, it led to us having to develop a product prior to Barcelona. So in 40 days, we went from a concept to a product in production, and not powder. These were effervescing tablets in blister packs in a box. When we launched the first supplement, which was 40 days after I'd met Roger and Eric, so it took 40 days to get a product.
40 days, and that was that bag of powder in your seat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we got a little bit more because we were able to get kilos at a time, but it eventually got to 10 kilos and then 100 kilos and then a metric ton of production. So we had access to creatine eventually, but it was small amounts initially. But the very first creatine product ever to be launched wasn't a powder. We launched a product called ErgoMax C150. The C150 was the secret code word we were using for this project. So this whole project in the run-up to Barcelona was called Project C150. We didn't want to use the word creatine. It was so hush-hush secret. The first product that we put into production ended up being effervescing tablets in blister strips that you dropped into water and they dissolved. Some athletes just crunched on the tablets because that's what athletes do. They just then drank cups of water or bottles of water. But we didn't even launch with a free-form powder. We wanted to create a very easy-to-use product that was portable, pre-measured, and we did that with a pharmaceutical company who moved heaven and earth for us in order to get a product pushed through their system. It literally was 40 days from concept, printed boxes, branding, product in blister packs, and then the athletes were being supplied with blister packs of creatine. And at that point, we were getting, in the run-up to Barcelona, the athletes went to Barcelona. They knew exactly what they needed to do. They had all the information. It was working for them in training. And up until we'd agreed with the athletes that until after the games, after the Barcelona Olympics, we would keep this totally silent. Nobody would know what that these athletes had used creatine. But there was a plot twist. one of the athletes, basically in the Olympic Village, was kind of, I guess, joking with the Americans, because a lot of these athletes, they train together, the Americans and the Canadians and the British team. A lot of them go to the same training camps. They all know each other. They're all competing in the same event. And this athlete basically said, we've got something you haven't got. And he showed them this box. And that box was a box of Ergomax creatine. They didn't know that there was an investigative journalist embedded in the Olympic Village that got wind of this, did his own investigation, got a box of the product. Our company's telephone number was on that box, and he called me up from the Olympic Village in Barcelona. And this journalist, called Doug Gillen, is arguably the person that played, I think, the most pivotal role in everything that Roger needed to happen and everything that we thought might happen, but none of us were prepared for it. Doug Gillen called me up out the blue from the Olympic Village. He told me that he was an investigative journalist and he knew exactly what was going on. And he knew it. And he said, look, it's creatine. I don't know what it is. I've never heard of it. But athletes are saying that they're using it. And I thought it was my brother calling me with a prank call. I just thought this isn't real. But it was real. And he basically said, you've got 24 hours to give me the facts. Otherwise, there's one of two stories that I'm going to tell. I'm either going to tell this as a potential doping in sports story, unless I know exactly what creatine is, or it's going to be the biggest human performance breakthrough maybe ever at this level. So I got Roger and Eric on a call with Doug. They shared all the science with him, all of the research. We'd already got approval from the British Olympic team and the Sports Council in the UK that creatine was safe to use. It's found naturally occurring in the diet, in meat and fish. We had all of that evidence. Once we provided the journalist with all of that evidence, he then broke the story. So 48 hours after he called me,
wow.
48 hours later, this story broke in one pretty big newspaper up in Scotland, but it was a big Scottish newspaper called the Herald. That was picked up on the newswire by just about every media agency. And that was the moment when everything changed. The interest in creatine, the demand for creatine exploded in a very short space of time. We were really doing this almost by hand, packing it by hand. We were getting orders coming in through a fax machine, many of them from the USA that had heard about it through the news. And we were shipping out orders in envelopes all over the world. There was no e-commerce. There was no internet as we know it today.
Yeah, there was no Meta paid ads. This was all organic growth.
No, it was word of mouth. It was little ads in specialist sport magazines. That's what you did. And we would come into the office every morning and the floor would be covered in paper through the fax machine. And these were all orders coming in from America where people were just going, this is my address. This is my credit card number. We had a machine that we would put a piece of paper
the
in
scanner.
and do the whole thing and literally get a clearance on their credit card and then send it all, most of it to America. About 80% was going to the US. And yeah, it just took off. It was just one of those moments where a compound that didn't exist in the vocabulary of supplements within a 5-year period, by the end of by the time of the Olympic Games in Atlanta, which was in 96, it's estimated that 80% of all athletes competing in Atlanta, the 96 games, were supplementing their diet with creatine. So it went,
Go ahead.
Yeah, so it went from Barcelona, a handful, to Atlanta. So you can see how fast this went. This was all within high-performance sport, elite athletes looking for a big performance edge, NFL, soccer, rugby, power, strength, speed sports. It went from being totally unknown just before the Barcelona Games. By the time of Atlanta, 80% of the athletes, regardless of their sport, were supplementing their diet with creatine. So in a 4-year period, it became quite well known. And we were very, very fortunate that we couldn't service the US market. We were building a sport nutrition company in Europe. All hands on deck, business growing in an amazing way. And we were quite fortunate that Anthony Almada and the team at EAS saw the opportunity with creatine, and they took on the US market. And some people would say, yeah, but you could have dominated the US market. But pre-internet, you can only do so much. You can only focus on certain geographies. And, the market in the US grew very, very quickly for creatine, much faster than Europe. Europe kind of was just bobbing along. The US exploded. The marketing in the US was incredible. The teams that were driving the introduction of creatine into the US basically had the playbook, and they just went all in with commercialization. That's why the US really has been. Many people think, well, no, it all started in America. They don't know this guy in England, in the north of England, that was the first person. But if you look at where did it really take off, it was in the USA. It was in America where it really it did explode.
Commercialized.
And we were just looking at this in awe from Europe and going, wow, with the best will in the world, we could never have done that as a European team. We would never have achieved the level of success that happened in America. And, I was very fortunate to have met with Anthony Almada when I was in San Diego just a few weeks ago. And he shared with me the real under the hood story of what they were doing. And it's like, that's the entrepreneur's journey,
It so is. So, which brings me to a question, because I know I'm dying to hear this answer. Okay, so the reporter breaks the story and finds out that these athletes have been using creatine and that use. How did you handle the potential doping concerns? And how did they, what happened where?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I think it's a really important point to make. And I think when you think about playbooks and thinking about, well, could it happen again? I think there are compounds that as the technology improves and we understand more about the human body and human performance, there are going to be creatine. Interesting, as I mentioned, creatine was discovered more than 100 years ago, but it was only in the 80s that the connection between creatine and human performance was made. I think there are compounds today that we buy as supplements that have the potential to have benefits in completely different use cases that we can't yet see. And for me, this is really exciting. So creatine, when it became apparent that it had this huge human performance benefit, a lot of people, and as you mentioned, Bonnie, a lot of people said, well, is it a steroid? How can something be so good, but it's legal? Well, if you eat enough meat, you can get a similar benefit, but you've got to eat pounds of meat, large quantities, to get 3 to 5 kilos of creatine. So you can't eat that much meat. But if you supplement with creatine, you can kind of saturate the cells, the muscles and the cells with creatine. And we found ourselves involved in a lot of discussion about whether or not it was right for athletes to have a compound that could improve their performance the way that creatine can. And that piece of the story was quite easy to answer, because if you use the right antioxidant combination, if you sleep well, if you train well, if you train at altitude and come back down to sea level, you get a huge performance advantage. There was nothing underhand about creatine. It was a discovery, but everything was above board. But where it got interesting was some athletes started to take very extreme amounts of creatine. So we would recommend 20 grams for a 5-day load to saturate the muscles, and then 5 grams a day thereafter. That works really well. And then you start to hear of athletes taking 20 grams a day every day, 50 grams. Well, if 50 grams is good, what about 100 grams? And at that point, you're getting into the realms of, you're not sure whether or not that's good. There was no research in terms of athletes taking 20, 30, 40, 50 grams a day. what demands are that putting on the body. There was also a moment in time where some athletes believed that if you superload with creatine and excrete more creatinine in your urine, it can potentially mask doping. It can actually become a masking agent for athletes that were potentially on a program, a doping program. We started to hear about athletes and even their coaches. We actually started getting coaches calling us up and going, did you think this is possible? And I'm going, whoa, I'm a supplement guy. I'm building a food company. I don't know, but I don't know. And it led us to a place by 1998 where we decided to press the pause button on creatine. We knew everything about what the good things about creatine were, and we've known that right from the get-go. But there was also it didn't fit with our branding and it didn't fit with our narrative, and we eventually removed creatine from our product line. How you say, well, why did you do that? Because it didn't fit the mainstream narrative that we were building with our nutrition company.
Well, trends play such a huge part in your products you're going to sell.
Yeah. I know, but it wasn't. Yeah, and creatine wasn't ready for the mainstream. It still sat in this world of elite performance, hardcore athletes, people that are working out in the gym, NFL. Like the real elites. That's where it sat. We knew there were benefits for it in the mainstream, but it didn't fit with what we were wanting to do with our brand maxim. And I think that was the right decision to make because, there's no such thing as an overnight success.
Your 30-year overnight success.
Well, that's what this kind of is.
Truly.
It is. It's a 30-year overnight success because we're now starting to realize that the research that is being published is demonstrating that there are these much wider benefits for creatine. When I filed the first real creatine patent after Roger and Eric had done the performance work in 92, in 93 I filed a creatine patent, and it's a patent actually that's cited quite frequently even today. The first ever creatine patent post 92, which I just happened to file this patent. In that patent we reference potential benefits when it comes to cognition, when it comes to dementia, potentially Alzheimer's. We knew that there were potential benefits, but there was no research to support this whatsoever. It's only in the last 5 years that the research has started to be published that is more than indicating now. It's apparent to the scientists that the real big benefits of taking creatine are arguably not with sport.
If you look at this, how interesting is that?
Yeah.
And you just happened to be the first patent filer on this. What advantages has that given you? Okay.
Patent expires. Our patent expired before creatine had got to the point where it was remotely ready for the mainstream. So we file a patent that is really a mainstream creatine patent, but nobody's ready for it. It's like, well, nobody had the research to support cognition, dementia, the brain.
Right.
What the implications of that mean as you're aging. I mean, these are really significant use cases and benefits for creatine. So if you look at where creatine is evolving to and where it's going to deliver the most benefits to society, traditionally it's sat in sport, and it's known in sport. I very rarely talk to somebody that works out at the gym or is an endurance athlete or they do, high rocks, or any of these intense competitions that aren't using creatine. Most people that I know that are into sport, even semi-recreationally now, are taking creatine. But the big benefits are around cognition and the brain and everything associated with it. The implications of that are profound. Huge benefits when it comes to bone health. New research showing that people that, placebo versus those that are taking creatine, the benefits to the bones is very significant in strengthening the bones, which is really important as you age, really important as a woman.
Let's go into some of that for women's health. That
Yeah.
is, I mean, goodness, when we were at the summit in San Diego, the last 2 years, they've just talked about the growing studies, informations around that. And now you're hearing, okay, well, creatine monohydrate, creatine HCl, which one is the best for a woman's body? Because we aren't made the same.
No, and it's a very good point, actually, because there are, apart from creatine monohydrate, there are other forms of creatine in the market: creatine esters, creatine HCl, creatine salt. Creatine monohydrate is the most researched form of creatine. There are in excess of 680 published studies specific to creatine monohydrate. It's arguably the most researched supplement compound in the world. It's so much research, so much replication of studies to prove out that one study wasn't just an anomaly, a fluke, a one-off. So the reason that one of the main reasons that creatine monohydrate is the most used is that it's backed by such huge amounts of research, which is very, very good. Some of these other forms of creatine, the research is coming, but it's not there yet. And I'm very much what I call creatine agnostic. I take creatine monohydrate. I buy creatine in the open market. I don't have any creatine brand supplying me because I like to try different types and find what works and comparing them when it comes to how they dissolve and all the rest of it. I buy creatine monohydrate from different brands.
What kind of creatine was the one you made for the first one? What kind of form was that?
It was monohydrate.
It was monohydrate. Okay.
Yeah, it was monohydrate. I don't think at that point there was anybody in the world synthesizing HCl or any of these other forms of creatine. That came much, much later. And it's why there is so much creatine monohydrate research. It's because that's been the dominant form and it's been the only available form for scientists to work with. And I think over the next decade, 2 decades, we're going to see lots of evolution of science, maybe even combinations of different forms of creatine to create hybrids in slightly different molecular structure. I see these things really, the use of technology is going to help immensely with the discovery of different forms of creatine and tweaks to monohydrate. Can we modify and tweak the molecular structure of monohydrate? It's all going to come, I think, over the next decade or two, probably over the next 2 decades. Because
so would monohydrate be the better one for women, or would it be HCl? And what's the difference?
It's a hard one for me to answer, and I don't think there is a black and white answer. I don't think it is either or. I think it ultimately comes down to the consumer believing which story of creatine is right for them, whether it's a monohydrate, a HCl story, which science and evidence gives that version of creatine the most trust and believability. I think if you create which is the right one, which is the wrong one, which is the better one, I think we're missing the opportunity. Ultimately, consumers, they need choice. You need to provide the market with options and consumers with choice. And I'm a real believer in, and I want to see the creatine ecosystem grow. The whole creatine economy can grow significantly. We're still in the world of sport. It's slowly moving out of the world of sport. But if you look at how much creatine globally is synthesized compared to how much can be synthesized when we take it across the chasm into the mainstream, it's still quite small amounts that is being synthesized. There's around about 27 to 30 million people a day supplementing with creatine globally. 27 to 30 million people a day. You think, well, that's quite a lot of people, 30 million. But when you look at the global population that is approaching 8 billion, and it's going to be 9 billion by 2040, I think, 30 million is a tiny, tiny, tiny number. And then if you kind of look at, okay, where are these new opportunities? Women's health. And then you think, okay, women's health, different product forms, mainstream, more consumable, more convenient, more of a delightful consumption experience, something that's like, oh, I don't want powder. I don't want the mess of it. I just want to be able to go in my refrigerator and I get 7 of those in a pack a week and I just drink it. And it's like best thing ever. It's like my all-in-one and it's got the amount of creatine in that I need. The market is going to go through a significant transformation because it has to get across the chasm to the mainstream consumer, to make it accessible and super convenient and available in convenience stores, food service, big box grocery, but not in the forms that we know today. It's the transformation that will take place in the next 5 years. It won't resemble, the creatine landscape won't look like it does today. It will start to resemble, I believe, over the next 5 years and definitely over the next 10 years, the creatinification of many things like we're seeing today with protein.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
yeah, and I think there's a handful of ingredients and compounds that are capable of crossing the chasm with new use cases and benefits.
What do you
For
think about
me,
them being combined with other ingredients? Like, do you feel like
yeah, I think
synergistically they
yeah,
would enhance each other?
yeah, I think there's huge opportunity to look at creatine and then putting what we call ingredient wrappers around creatine for different use cases, for different segments of the population, for different need states that we have, for different parts of the day when you might want creatine with that, because that's what my body needs then at that moment. I think the innovation white space is huge, and it's not a winner takes all. For me, it's an ecosystem, and there's so many spaces where creatine can play. And as the understanding of how do we stabilize creatine in liquid evolves, how does creatine work in a product form that it isn't in today? Is it stable? Does it react with other ingredients? Does it react with the packaging? It's lots of kind of permutations and considerations to consider. But I feel that, and it's one of the reasons that 24 months ago I made a decision to come back into the world of nutrition. I was ready to do it.
Yeah, that was my next question. Where have you been
Yeah.
hiding this whole time, Steve?
Oh,
I want to
we'll get onto
know.
the hiding question in a moment, because it hasn't really been hiding. It's just
I
been,
know, but how I have never heard of you with all this
yeah,
creatine. It's like it's
I
just
know,
about the
I know.
commercialization, not the innovator.
Yeah, yeah. We'll get onto the innovator's entrepreneurial journey in a moment. But before I do, I just want to talk for a minute about what I think is the biggest white space opportunity. And I
Okay.
think the biggest white space opportunity is women's health for me, because there are a number of key use cases that are crucial when it comes to women's health and the benefits that creatine can provide. And I think knowing that a compound that is safe, that is well researched, that is available, is accessible, and is only going to become more accessible in product forms that are very convenient, is going to make it very attractive to a women's audience. So when we think of menopause, when we think of our bone health, when we think of cognition and brain health, when we think of a young mum that's got a full-time job, on all day, tired, absolutely her need to optimize the production of cellular energy
Oh,
is so big.
huge.
And it's huge, Bonnie. And one of the things that we need to do as a creatine ecosystem, if we're serious about building what I call real long-term businesses, like real, we're here for the
Legacy.
long play,
Yeah.
the legacy, we have to acknowledge that the only way we get creatine across the chasm, it's not just the products, it's the storytelling. It's creating the content that is right for these emerging audiences. That's what we have to do. We're speaking to so many people now that are outside of the core sport space. They aren't that kind of a customer. That isn't their world. And their first reaction is, how come we don't know about this? Why do we just relate creatine to bodybuilding, sport, getting big?
Well, the awareness with people, I mean, just even in
Yes,
the gym, if you think about the last 20 years,
I
when I
know.
started as a personal trainer, people were coming to the gym. It was either a bodybuilder, an
Yeah,
athlete, or it was a
yeah,
luxury. And now who do
yes,
you have in the gym? You've got teenagers, you've got
yeah.
everyday people. And now
Everyday
they're like, well,
people.
how do I feel better doing what
Yes,
makes me feel good? And you're
yes,
saying the evolution of supplements is not just for sports performance, it's for the
no,
everyday person. And the
yes.
best way to get that sold in households is when you can get the women of these households to understand what it's doing for them. You've just optimized the whole family.
Yeah, the entry point for us and the key to this is women, the family, women's health, and then having the story that is full cross generational. It's a cross generational product,
Yeah,
and that's the great thing about creatine. It isn't when's the best time to start today.
right.
Yesterday would have been better. If you're in your 40s, 20
I'm
years
I'm
ago would
turning
be better
40
than
this
now.
year actually, and this is the
Yep,
time in my
yep.
life, correct me if I'm wrong, where when what I want to be in at 80 starts right now.
Yeah, you're in the critical decade, the key decade actually, Bonnie, because during your 20s and 30s, you have that youthful vitality, that vigor. Much of the it's like, why could I pull an all-nighter and go to work?
I don't
Why
know.
could I do
I
that
never
in
pulled
my
an all-nighter
20s?
even in my teens though,
What
so
why can I do that? Why can I go and watch a rock concert and get home at 4 in the morning and be
yeah.
getting up to go to work at 6?
Yeah.
Well, your mitochondria were producing cellular energy at a level that
Yeah.
enabled you to do that. As you age, and especially in your 40s, the ability of the mitochondria to produce cellular energy starts to diminish. 1% a year, 1.5% a year. I'm 64. Unbelievable. I'm 64. I'm now at a point in my life where I'm benefiting from creatine in ways that I didn't fully understand until I went off creatine and then came back on it. And it's like, okay, now I fully understand the cognition part. I fully understand what it's like to wake up in a morning and feel so. It, and I talk to people about the energy that you get from creatine. It's foundational cellular energy. You just feel recovered after a night's sleep. It could be a 4 hour sleep. You wake up and you feel, I don't ache. It's like, this is great. I'm going to go play with the grandkids. I'm going to do yard work. I'm going to go and play padel. I'm going to go to CrossFit. I've got to go and travel for the next 3 days with my job. It makes you feel recovered. It makes you feel sharper because we have to use simple language. All we want people to do is to feel really good.
So how does it work in your body? Give people a visualization. You ingest creatine, it goes
Yeah.
into the cell, and what's
Yeah.
happening in the mitochondria?
Basically, the creatine is being converted into utilizable cellular energy. And there's a process inside of the mitochondria. We have 17 trillion mitochondria in our body. Trillion. And inside of those mitochondria, it's like a battery. Okay.
Okay.
That battery is producing energy, like a flywheel, like a generator. It's spinning around, producing cellular energy. And that cellular energy is it ultimately determines how you feel. Okay, there are many other factors. There are so many other factors that come into play: state of mind, stress, all these other there are many variables. So
Yeah, but
you
having
have
that
to.
healthy mitochondria helps you
Yes,
to deal with these outside
yes.
things.
It helps you to cope. It helps you to feel strong, resilient. These are all words that, I've got. My team is made up of quite a few women are on my team. It's got nothing to do with whether you're a guy and you want to feel fearless and resilient and strong. We all want to feel resilient and fearless and strong.